Sports video games, they were long the scourge of the retro collecting hobby. They were seen as unsophisticated, unwanted, and unneeded in any respectable retro gaming collection. But here in 2020, something interesting is happening. Slowly but surely, there is a resurgence in both the popularity of classic sports video games and their prices. And I'm going to explore in this video why that is. On the surface, it's perhaps due to the coronavirus situation, which has altered how we consume sports, has delayed the start of leagues, has made the look and feel of sports different, and perhaps some people are kind of going back to the happier days of sports fandom. But there's a deeper story, and I think it's one of the more interesting and perhaps unexplored stories here in the retro gaming hobby. So sit back and let's look at why sports video games are worth collecting. So two games illustrate why I think this resurgence is happening. One of them is NCAA Football 14, available for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. And this game is notable because it is the last licensed college football game before the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit, which effectively ended any college sports franchises, and I think rightfully so. I kind of side with the players on that issue. But nonetheless, this game has become very expensive. And I don't think it's just because of NCAA nostalgia, but that's part of it. I think the broader reason, and one of the key reasons why we're seeing sports games rise in popularity and price generally, is because they give players something that modern sports games don't. And you might argue that this is the last great Madden engine game. It gave you college football. Yes, it did do that, and that's a big part of it. But it also has, I believe, still functioning online server, so you can still play this game online, and it's an online game that is about, and I've only played it once or twice online back when I had it, it's about skill. It's about playing Madden football well. There's, I don't believe there's a lot of the ultimate card stuff. If there is, I just ignored it, but it's a fun representation of a modern Madden football game, and I even think the controls, the play calling, there is a crispness to this game that I don't think you find in any modern Madden games. And I haven't played a Madden since I think Madden 18 or 19. But, you know, the modern Maddens are the same old thing. And this is built on the same engine. And I don't like that engine. So to me, this game is still, you know, represents a lot of the negatives of modern Madden football. But within that context, it is, you know, again, I think the best modern Madden engine game, and it gives you the fun of college football on a relatively modern console. We are looking at All-Pro Football 2K8, and I think this game perfectly represents a second reason for the rise in popularity and price of sports video games, and that is the ability for certain games to be emulated really well. And this is an example of PS3 emulation on the PC. This game, you know, can run at 60 FPS. Sometimes, you know, depending on the strength of your system, you can get this game in 4K. So it looks, I think, you know, it still animates and in some respects, I think still plays better than modern Madden games. And like NCAA 14, because it offers that ability to be played in a modern resolution on a high-quality PC, you see it going from between $80 to $100. Same thing with NCAA 14. When this game came out, you know, I bought it on the Xbox 360. And whether it was the lack of licenses or, you know, it just, I don't know, it didn't work for me personally back in the day. But having gone back and rediscovered it, you know, it is like ESPN 2K5. You know, it runs a newer version of that engine. It looks great. And I think the graphics stand up. Another reason why this game has become so popular and pricey is because they have someone who's released a sort of PC-based editor where you can kind of update the players, create graphics so that you have reasonable approximations of helmet art and things like that, and you can basically, every year play a modern season of the NFL, or in this case, I think, this clip is somebody who recreated the 1993 season. So you have this community of fans who are giving games a new life. And as such, because of their efforts, the prices have risen online. Another really great example of a game that has been sustained by a community is MVP Baseball 2005. A lot of people think this is the greatest baseball video game ever made, that it's better than MLB The Show today, and it has been updated online by fans ever since the 2005 season. Now you're seeing it run here on the PC SX2, the PlayStation 2 emulator for the PC, and that emulator really breathes life into so many sports games. It has made PlayStation 2, I think, the go-to source for nostalgic sports games, because you can get the resolution up to a point where, it looks reasonably modern, and they have different speed hacks that allow the game to play fast, that allow the games to, in fact, in some cases, play better than they do on the original PlayStation 2 hardware. And I don't think, that there's maybe like some other retro games where you need, for sports games, that absolute sense of authenticity. I might be wrong there. Maybe people, really love MVP Baseball, and they really wouldn't want to play it on a computer, up-resed and with different hacks and stuff like that. I personally think that while it's fun on the PlayStation 2, it's a lot better on the PC, and of course on the PC, that's where you get access to the roster updates. This game is also notable because it just has so much depth. It has a whole series of mini-games. It allows you to run a franchise mode, I believe over 100 seasons with full stat tracking. And it's giving you something in that instance that modern sports games do not give you, and that is a self-contained dynasty mode. A dynasty mode that's not predicated on microtransactions, not predicated on any kind of predatory business model. It allows you to create your own seasons and develop your own stories and have everything that you want. A league, its history, player development, drafting, everything in one package. And I think MVP Baseball is an example of a game that combines, really excellent gameplay. I'm not very good at it, as you can see, but, excellent gameplay, strong emulator performance, and the ability to basically, have an entire history of the sport on one memory card. Now, another game that does a great job of creating a unique history on your memory card is the NCAA Football series, particularly 2006 through 2011. This is the 2011 NCAA Football game from EA. It is their last NCAA Football game on the PS2, so it uses that engine. But really, any game from 06 to 11 is really good. You can, bring your player from essentially a college recruit, a high school kid trying out, to all the way through to the Madden games, and you could really create a whole career across two games, which was a really unique feature back in that day. You can have the dynasty mode. You can, do all sorts of recruiting and game planning. It's a really, really deep system. And, what it gives you is just a pure and fun football game. There's no, of course, back then, this game was online actually back then, but there were no Madden cards. There's no microtransactions. It's just pure fun football. It works well in single-player mode. It is a great couch multiplayer game, and, these years, 06 through 11, the game really came into its own with this kind of home field advantage system where the screen shakes and the fans can rattle players. There's a momentum system, and unlike the Madden games, there's so many teams, and each team feels different. And if you can beat one of the top college football teams with a lesser program, it feels really like an accomplishment, because the game is tweaked in such a way where it's not just your skill as a player. It's, again, the aforementioned momentum. It's, the size and skill of the players. It's, being rattled. There's really a lot to this game that makes it probably, just from a pure football standpoint, better than the Madden games. If I had to choose, I would go with 2006, because, it has all the features of this game, and it's a lot cheaper. NCAA Football 11 is in the $50 to $70 range, whereas 06, it can still be had for under $10. Plus, 06 is a snappier menu system, and it feels like kind of the last game that the devs really put a lot of effort into before the release of the PlayStation 3. So any of those games, highly recommended. Now on the flip side, you're looking at NCAA 2003, which was more like an early Madden game on the PS2. And it feels more classic, more traditional, but I actually think it looks better. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't emulate well, or in my case, at all. I couldn't create an ISO of the disc. It just failed. I don't know if that's due to my disc, or if there's just something about the game that makes it hard to rip. Maybe there's an ISO file floating around online. But to me, this is worth picking up. Still looks good, actually, on the PlayStation 2 because of the kind of the beefier nature of the players. It doesn't have the momentum system. It doesn't have the noise rattling features. It feels more or less like Madden 2002, 2003, which is not a bad thing. And if you're just looking for something different, you're looking for a more traditional college football game, I would recommend picking this up. It's dirt cheap. You can get it for under $5. So if you can get 2003 and 2006, you are well sorted for college football for the long term. One of the things that really stands out when you go back and you play these PS2 era sports games is effort. EA Sports actually put effort into making fun sports games. Sports games weren't a vehicle for a larger diabolical plan to extract every cent of profit from every possible player. They actually created fun games, and they didn't rest on their laurels as much. What you're seeing here is the Arena Football series. And now I had seen this out in the stores, and I was like, Arena Football sucks. I'm a college and NFL fan. I'm not going to waste my money on this. But I know people who played this and said it was good, and so I recently picked it up. There are two versions. I got them for under $10 each, and it is a fun game. It is Madden. It is the Madden engine, but tweaked in such a way that it feels faster. It feels a little bit more violent. It almost has an NFL blitz feel to it, and it captures Arena Football. And I've watched very little Arena Football in my life, but that dynamic, quick, high-scoring gameplay, it does a nice job of representing that sport and still being a fun arcadey football game. Today, of course, EA Sports wouldn't even bother to release something like this. It wouldn't sell, and if they did, it would be kind of a monetized mini-game. But going back to this era and exploring, attempts at representing different sports is, I think, one of the fun aspects of collecting these retro sports games. So speaking of discovering gems in the rough, what you're looking at is an ESPN football game for the PlayStation 2, but it's not the elephant in the room, which we're going to get to. No, this is ESPN NFL Primetime, a game put out by Konami right at the very early days of the PlayStation 2. And it's also very cheap these days. It doesn't really stand up to Madden, to the 2K NFL games, but it's fun. It has kind of a different feel to it. It's not really realistic. It works more on like an arcade premise, but for, $8 or $9, it's actually a pretty fun NFL game that I think is worth checking out if you kind of have, the heavy hitters in the category and you just want something different. It is amusing in a lot of ways. It has commentary from Chris Berman and Tom Jackson, and Jackson is like, delivering his lines as if he's reading them to a kindergarten class. It's pretty amusing. Again, it's not really a hardcore simulation. It's a fun arcadey game. It has quirky controls, but I think the quirk is part of the fun. And, if you can find it for under $10, I think it's worth checking out. Also emulates really well. So if sports games are becoming popular because they give you something that modern franchises don't, and they emulate well, then there is no better example than ESPN NFL 2K5. This is largely and widely considered one of the greatest sports games of all time. Many people think it is the greatest football game of all time. And while I was always a Madden fan, I do appreciate this game. And when you run it on the PC, PlayStation 2 emulator, it just gives you everything you want. To me, it looks, it competes, at least as far as player models and animation, with modern Madden games. It just has a unique feel to it. I always thought that playing defense and running the football in these games was more satisfying than Madden. I didn't like the passing game, kind of the, drop step passing game. And, if it's a 3-step drop, waiting for the quarterback pump to deliver the football. I know that's more accurate. But to me, it just was never as, free and creative feeling as Madden. But again, defense and running is great. You could see here with the graphics that it really does look good on PC. And, I can't say anything that hasn't been said about this game. If you put it into YouTube, you'll find people really digging deep into why this is an absolutely amazing football game. But I'll just leave you with a little kind of technical detail. When you run these games on the emulator, you have a choice of playing, from the original disc, or, you can play an ISO. And this is a game that really benefits from, ripping it and running it off of the ISO. It's way smoother. I mean, it feels, perfect. When you have to, when you're running it off the disc, when the disc is loading information in, it results in really noticeable hitches. So, burn it, run the ISO, and enjoy one of the greatest sports games of all time, and in one of the best forms that you can play it today. Those of us who grew up in the 90s, I think, and you like sports and you like video games, you always had an affinity for hockey video games, starting with NHL 94, or in my case, a little bit earlier with 93. And hockey video games, to me, are just still fun, and they were really, really great in the PS2 era. So I'm going to show you one that emulates great and one that does not emulate so well. So if you want a nice emulation experience and a great hockey game, I recommend anything between NHL 2K5 and 2K7. You're looking at 2K7 here. And to me, and I don't even think this video does it justice with the compression that's in there, but they are, they really, really look great, and the speed hacks that you get with the PCSX emulator makes these feel really, really crisp and so much better, I would have to say, than on console. Hook up a PS4 controller and activate the speed hacks, and you've got just an amazing hockey game. I always like to play this on the side view. I'm actually just running the demo because I think it shows the character models a little bit better than just the pure kind of side view game. But I never played this from the overhead perspective. I thought it was a lot more fun when I made it look like blades of steel. But any of those games are great. And again, just like NFL 2K5, you have the ESPN presentation. You've got a reasonably deep and fun season and dynasty mode. Another thing that I have to mention while we're talking about the dynasty modes and season modes, a lot of the times in a lot of these games, you can actually play any game. And you're not locked into just one team. That's a kind of a side note, not specific to this game. But what is specific to this game is fun, fast gameplay. And, these games are really, really cheap. You can get 2K6, which is a little bit more difficult to emulate, but 2K5 and 2K7 are really easy to get running well on the emulator and are really worth your time. And then, of course, you have the vaunted EA NHL series. You're looking at EA Sports NHL 2004. I would recommend 2004 or 2006. Now, 2004 on the PS2, I think, is one of the few games that works in progressive scan mode, and it looks considerably better than the other entries. What you're looking at here is the GameCube version. I had the GameCube version back in the day, and I actually thought that the graphics were a little bit better and the gameplay was a little bit smoother on the GameCube. I don't know if that was just the case for this game, and this was the only EA Sports hockey game that I played on the GameCube, but it felt really, really solid. Just the control layout for the GameCube I thought worked pretty well, but it looks better on the PlayStation 2, when you run it in that progressive mode. Now, unfortunately, neither 2006 or 2004 run particularly well on the emulator. You'll find that with some EA Sports games, particularly hockey and basketball, there's a graphical glitch where the play surface kind of goes black, and I have not figured out a way to correct that. There are a lot of game-specific hacks. That's a really, really granular level of control you have with the emulator. I just haven't figured out how to make it work. I would love to get it to work, because these are sensational games. But I'm happy to report that they play still pretty well, pretty fast on the original hardware. I just had a game of NHL 06 with a good friend of mine last weekend, and we had a blast, or at least I had a blast, because I actually won, and I hardly ever beat him. But it just took me back to those days of the mid 2000s. So this to me was, if you had shown this to me in 1994 and said this is the future of hockey video games, this was these years, 04 to 06. This was, NHL 94 for the modern world, and it still, has that sense of fun and enjoyment. So pick these up. They're a few bucks and well worth your time. Now, as far as basketball goes, basketball games have not aged well from this era. And if I had to recommend one, it would be March Madness, EA Sports March Madness 2004. Now, this game is not great. It is not particularly realistic. I would say that it feels more like an arcade game, but that's not a bad thing, at least with whatever the kind of standard control and game sliders are. It's very heavy on dunking and big impact plays, but I think that's okay. I really like this game. I think, every game you play, or at least I've played, whether you're doing couch co-op or, you're in the Final Four, it's fun, it's quick. It feels like, almost like it has an NBA Jam type of system where you can get players hot, and there is a sense of momentum. It captures that feel of the Final Four when, you've got a kid playing really, really well, you get him the ball, and he tries to take over the game. It captures the emotion of really, really good NCAA tournament games, even though it doesn't look good, and compared to a modern 2K basketball game, it's actually laughable. But this is the one I go back to. I think it's better than a lot of the NBA Live games. I think it's better than, or it's at least more fun than some of the 2K basketball games from this era. And for me, it's the only one worth playing. If I had to choose, it's not a retro basketball game, but NBA 2K11 on the PC or Xbox 360, I think, is one of the best, if not the best, basketball game of all time. I also like 2K17, but if we're talking PS2 era, for my money, this is fun. $3-4, worth your time. And I will leave you with a golf game, and that is Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2005, specifically for the GameCube. I think this is one of the best EA Sports games ever made, and it was just a brilliant job. You talk about caring. When EA Sports cared what they could do with a sport. And so this game was a particularly effective mixture of a semi-simulation golf game and a fun, arcadey golf game. So the simulation aspect was you were rewarded for mastering, reading the winds, reading the greens, mastering the touch system, where you could set up your shot and then use whatever the sort of hard shoulder button was on the right-hand side of the GameCube controller, to really put the right amount of spin on the ball. And you could really develop an accurate mid to short game if you could do that and compete, in all the different difficulty levels and tournaments. But you also had some, what I'll call, power-ups. You had green vision that you could use a couple of times to sink the really difficult putt. You had a power mode where you could really smash, some drives in an unrealistic way. You had a character development system where you could, buy different pieces of equipment. You could develop your character over a career, and eventually he or she might become overpowered. You had the realistic courses, not too many of them. You had some fun, challenging, unrealistic courses, particularly Greece, which was almost like a mini golf course, and it was, for me, one of the more difficult ones. But I put hours into this game. It was just fun. And I think if we leave it there for this video, beyond emulation, beyond, all the different dynasty modes, these games gave you what you wanted as a sports fan and as a video game fan. Their primary focus was creating a fun sports game. And I think we will never see that again. It may sound dramatic, but I just think the business model of video games today, the financial incentives, and actually the business imperatives of these companies to make as much money as you can, I don't think you're going to go back to a game that prioritizes the fun single-player or multiplayer experience, that invests resources into representing the sport accurately, or coming up with a representation of the sport that is both accurate and fun. There's no money to be made in that today. The money is in the Ultimate Team. The money is in the microtransactions. The money is in securing exclusive licenses, so you skin the game in a meaningful way for players, and then develop systems to nickel and dime them for the entirety of their playtime. It's about financialized and monetized engagement, and it's not about sports, it's not about fun, and it's not about enjoying your time and having an emotional connection to these games that maybe you would get from a couch multiplayer. It's not about giving you the opportunity to tell your own stories in a deep and statistically rich dynasty mode. It's about making as much money off of you as possible. So because we're not going to go back, in time from a design standpoint, I think more and more players, particularly players who love games and who love sports, will go back to this era. And the better we are at emulating these games, the better we are in the community space of making them playable today, of giving them a modern feel, and of emphasizing their strengths, I think we're just at the beginning of an amazing resurgence for retro sports video games.